Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your way in, really, to understanding complex topics using the materials that matter to you.
And today, we're doing just that. We're focusing on a specific astrological report you shared with us, one by someone named Lorenzo concerning Pope Francis.
Yes, exactly. And it's really important we state this up front. We're going to present Lorenzo's findings just as he wrote them in this report.
Absolutely. No interpretation from our side, no tweaking the language. It's about faithfully conveying what Lorenzo documented.
And Lorenzo, according to this report, claims a certain level of precision here. He talks about a track record of specific predictions tied to planetary movements.
Right. He makes a point in the report that these aren't, vague predictions, but forecasts tied to specific moments in time.
Okay. So with that framework, let's dive in. Where does Lorenzo start in this report? What was the initial prediction he points to?
Well, according to Lorenzo's report, it starts back in February 2025. He says he released a podcast then. And in that podcast, he claims he predicted Pope Francis's death. He mentions exact transits, dates, even the medical decline all laid out back then, according to him.
And the reality was Pope Francis passed away on April 21st, 2025. Lorenzo had something to say after that happened, didn't he, based on the report?
Oh, definitely. The report quotes him directly. He said things like, "I warned you about the Saturn return. I mapped out the Saturn square sun."
Pretty forceful language.
Yes. I called the timing, the collapse, the silence, the symbolic fall. He explicitly labels it precision prophecy in the report, something beyond just general astrology.
And did Lorenzo's report touch on the bigger picture, the Vatican itself?
It did. Lorenzo stated that the Vatican's transformation is now underway, and he positions himself in the report as the first person to have predicted this specific outcome.
Interesting. Now, Lorenzo highlights a specific date before the Pope's passing, April 10th, 2025. What's the significance there, according to his analysis?
Lorenzo's report views April 10th as, well, the moment the papacy essentially died in public view.
How so?
He describes that scene we saw Pope Francis in the wheelchair, wearing a poncho, but without the usual white cassock or the skull cap.
And Lorenzo's interpretation of that image, as laid out in the report, it wasn't just practical.
No, not according to Lorenzo. He saw it as a silent admission, basically, that the Pope wasn't fully functional anymore.
So he pushed back against the idea it was just a simple visit.
Yeah, the report says he argued against the spontaneous visit explanation. He pointed to the Pope's age, the recent hospital stay, and called it, his words, a controlled optic stunt.
And the clothes themselves, or the lack of them, were key for Lorenzo.
Absolutely central, based on the report. The missing white cassock wasn't a fashion choice in Lorenzo's view.
Right.
It was presented as a visual signal, like the Pope couldn't uphold the role anymore, physically or symbolically.
So leading up to the Pope's death, how did Lorenzo characterize the papacy in his report? What was the state of things?
He described it as a prolonged retirement without announcement. That's the phrase used in the report.
Meaning,
in Lorenzo's assessment, the Pope was already acting like someone who had sort of stepped back, lacking active governance, clear communication, consistent presence.
it's like he wasn't fully steering the ship anymore.
Exactly. Lorenzo used this striking metaphor in the report. The ghost of St. Peter rolled through Vatican corridors as a symbol, not a sovereign.
Wow. And Lorenzo claims all of this matched his astrological forecasts.
That's the core argument in his report, yes, that these events unfolded precisely as his predictions indicated.
Which predictions specifically?
He lists them. The report mentions Saturn square sun representing the breaking of body and power. He puts check next to that in his notes, apparently.
Okay.
Then Jupiter approaching opposition to the sun, signaling a public turning point. He marked that in progress, and he saw the whole Jubilee year as a kind of collapsing stage.
So Lorenzo's conclusion at that stage, according to the report, wasn't about scandal.
No. His analysis, as presented, was that the papacy was crumbling through this slow, inevitable decline, not some sudden blow-up.
Okay, let's move past April 21st. After Pope Francis died, Lorenzo revisited his earlier claims in a later part of the report.
He did. The report reiterates his February prediction, stressing that he'd foreseen the decline, the timing, the consequences.
And he included specific quotes from that February podcast.
Yes, the report lists several. Things like, this pneumonia isn't just an illness, it's the beginning of the end.
Direct.
And Saturn return is ending. Saturn opposes Neptune. He's losing vitality, authority, control.
He connected it to specific astrological timing.
Very much so. According to the report, he said, by April 2025, Saturn square sun kicks in. That's when the body gives up.
And the finality of it.
He included this quote, if he doesn't resign by then, nature will do it for him. death, collapse, finality.
So after the event, Lorenzo's report then breaks down the astrological proof as he saw it.
Exactly. The report details his interpretation of the alignments. The Saturn return ending February 2025, he saw that as a major karmic cycle ending, especially significant given the Pope's age. Saturn opposite Neptune, Lorenzo interpreted that as the illusion of vitality breaking down.
And the Saturn square Sun in April.
That, he stated, was the trigger for the body failing, which obviously coincided with the Pope's death.
Right.
He also mentioned Jupiter oppositions that were coming in May and June. He thought those might have been triggers for the Vatican's final actions if the Pope had survived, but noted he didn't live to see them.
Lorenzo's report also had that striking phrase about the Pope's appearance on April 10th.
It did. Referring to the poncho incident, the report calls it the funeral before the funeral. It also comments on how limited the Pope's movement seemed.
And then presumably the report notes the actual event.
Yes, it references the headline flash. Pope Francis dies, April 21st, 2025.
So after confirming the death against his prediction, Lorenzo's report looks forward. What did he predict would happen immediately after?
Right, the report asserts the death wasn't the end point. Lorenzo calls it the start of phase one.
Phase one of what? What follows, according to Lorenzo?
He lists several things in the report, predicting a weak successor pope,
Okay.
a divided conclave to elect that pope. He foresaw the Jubilee year 2025 descending into chaos, scandals emerging, betrayals within the hierarchy.
A crisis of faith.
A major one, yes. Lorenzo states in the report, quite bluntly, this was only phase one of what I predicted. You think it ends with a funeral. It begins now.
So let's unpack that forecast further. Lorenzo's report gets into the specifics for the Catholic Church and global religion after April 21st. What about the immediate power vacuum, say, April to June 2025?
For that period, the report highlights key transits. Saturn square Sun still peaking, Jupiter opposing the Sun in May, and Jupiter opposing Jupiter in June.
And what kind of atmosphere did Lorenzo predict based on those?
He described it as transition chaos in the report. Not orderly, but reactive, messy, ideologically brutal was the term used.
Internal conflict.
Yeah, Lorenzo predicted a fracturing of the Curia, the Vatican's administration, between the traditionalists and the reformists.
He felt Pope Francis had kept them in check.
His report argues Bergoglio maintained a kind of standoff, and now it would become a free-for-all.
And linking that to the astrology.
Lorenzo connected Saturn square Sun to institutional fatigue, closures, power struggles. Jupiter opposite Sun in May, he saw as forcing some kind of public symbolic shift, maybe a rushed conclave or a shock resignation from someone else.
And the Jupiter opposition Jupiter in June.
That, according to the report, was the key astrological moment Lorenzo had pointed to, marking the official end of the Francis era. He expected radical ideas, surprise contenders, maybe even a placeholder pope without real power.
Moving on to the next phase in Lorenzo's report, June to October 2025, he predicted a new pope would emerge.
Yes, but his forecast wasn't optimistic. The report predicts that next pope will be a weak figurehead, someone unable to really unite the factions.
Why weak? What characteristics did Lorenzo suggest?
The report suggests possibilities. Maybe too old, too bland, perhaps too progressive for some, or maybe easily manipulated. The point was, his reign starts under planetary stress, according to Lorenzo.
What stress?
Lorenzo's report points to Jupiter square Saturn, calling it a trap, meaning any apparent progress gets bogged down in gridlock, leading to internal revolt.
He also mentioned eclipses.
Yes. The report predicts the September 2025 eclipses will expose some kind of scandal financial, maybe something else humiliating causing panic in the Vatican.
And October's eclipses.
Lorenzo forecasted those would trigger a growing exodus from the church, especially in Europe and the Americas, leading to mass disillusionment, as the report puts it.
What about the ongoing Jubilee year? How did Lorenzo see that playing out after Pope Francis's death, according to the report?
The report predicts it won't be remembered for unity or mercy. Instead, it becomes defined by fractured faith.
How would that look practically?
Lorenzo anticipated fewer pilgrimages, more vocal discontent from laypeople demanding reforms, bishops leaking internal debates, and lots of finger-pointing between conservatives and progressives.
Is there specific astrology, Lorenzo, tied to that?
Yes. The report links Lilith and Scorpio trine Uranus to rebellion from within, especially from marginalized groups challenging doctrine.
And Pluto?
Pluto squared the nodes, Lorenzo interpreted as a time of karmic exposure for the church's relationship with power, money, and silence on past issues. He predicted those involved in cover-ups would be the first to fall.
Finally, then, Lorenzo's report looks further ahead, late 2025 into 2026. He talks about religious authority itself being dismantled.
That's the prediction. The report suggests the Vatican's moral authority collapses by early 2026. The structure might remain, but Lorenzo believes the spiritual core will be gone.
And the new pope.
The report even suggests the new pope might resign early or face a health crisis. Lorenzo connects this to Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries, a transit he associates with loss of clarity, health, and control.
So, if traditional authority collapses, what fills the void according to Lorenzo's report?
Lorenzo foresees a major shift away from Catholicism and other traditional religions,
Towards what?
towards more individualized spirituality. The report lists things like DIY approaches, astrology, mysticism, rediscovering ancestral faiths, blending social justice with spirituality, and the rise of new spiritual leaders, some genuine, some perhaps manipulative.
And Lorenzo wraps this all up by reiterating his claims of accuracy.
Yes. The report concludes by restating his assertion that he predicted the Pope's decline, the April collapse, the ensuing chaos, the weak successor, the faith crisis, and the Vatican's exposure, all with what he calls ruthless precision.
And his final thought in the report.
It's quite stark. The report ends with Lorenzo stating, "What comes now isn't evolution, it's exorcism. The system is being forced to face what it's suppressed for centuries, and it won't survive intact."
Oh, wow. That is certainly, as we said, a comprehensive and very direct astrological report from Lorenzo. We've laid it out just as presented.
It definitely provides you, the listener, with that unfiltered perspective on one person's interpretation of these major potential shifts, all based on his astrological framework.
Indeed. And given the sheer detail and the confidence in Lorenzo's predictions, as documented here, it certainly offers a distinct viewpoint to consider. So, thinking about Lorenzo's very specific forecast, what parts of his analysis resonate or stand out most starkly to you, and how might this particular astrological lens shape how you view what's happening now within the church and the wider world of faith?